You'd probably find yourself yearning for the relative ease of potty training a particularly stubborn 2-year-old in, say, suburban Chicago, Illinois, within minutes. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from tonight, and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine yourself. Now, an ancient Spartan parent, not confidently bringing your newborn home to a perfectly appointed nursery in, say, Portland, Oregon, surrounded by loving family and the latest baby gear, but instead standing silently, anxiously, as your tiny infant is presented to a council of elders, their faces grim, their judgment final. Picture yourself as a new parent in a remote survivalist community in the American wilderness during the 18th century, where every child born faces a brutal assessment of their physical viability, and any perceived weakness could mean immediate abandonment. Or consider a family during a severe historical famine in, say, rural Appalachia, where resources are so scarce that decisions about who lives and who doesn't are agonizingly made based on who has the best chance of survival. Far more immediate and less personally secure than simply celebrating a healthy birth in a modern suburban home in Boston, Massachusetts. The gentle cries of your newborn, once a sound of pure joy, now mingle with the chilling silence of communal judgment and the unspoken fear of rejection, thick with the pervasive anxiety of a life balanced precariously on the edge of state approval. This is the pervasive, often terrifying, reality of the Spartan cradle, birth, and infanticide's shadow, where the very beginning of life was not a moment of unconditional acceptance, but a brutal, state-controlled assessment, transforming the joyous act of childbirth into a profound, often agonizing test of viability, and revealing a chilling truth that in this warrior society, individual lives were utterly secondary to the collective strength of the state, making the earliest moments of existence a terrifying gamble and a silent testament to the absolute power of Spartan ideology over the sanctity of human life. From the very moment a Spartan child entered the world, their life was not truly their own. Unlike modern parenting, where a newborn is cherished and protected unconditionally, in Sparta, every infant faced an immediate and brutal assessment. This wasn't a gentle checkup by a pediatrician in, say, a modern hospital in Seattle. Washington. This was a life or death decision made by elders who embodied the harsh ideals of the state. It truly sucked to bring a child into the world only for it to be immediately judged, but such was the Spartan way. A common historical truth is that Spartan society practiced a form of state-sanctioned infanticide, where male infants deemed physically weak or deformed by a council of elders were left to die in the apothetae, a chasm at the foot of Mount Tegetus, ensuring only the strongest survived to potentially become warriors. Historians still widely debate the precise scale and frequency of this practice, and whether the primary motivation was eugenics, resource management, or a combination of factors reflecting Sparta's unique military ethos. Upon birth, your tiny, vulnerable infant would be presented to a council of elders, often located at a place known as the Lesh, a public meeting hall. These weren't loving grandparents. These were stern, unyielding men, often former warriors, whose sole focus was the strength and purity of the Spartan state. They would meticulously inspect your baby for any sign of physical deformity, weakness, or perceived imperfection. No detail was too small, no blemish overlooked. Imagine the agonizing weight, your heart pounding, as these elders scrutinized your child, their faces impassive, their judgment silent. The criteria for this assessment were brutally simple physical perfection and robust health. A crooked limb, a slight deformity, a perceived weakness in constitution, any of these could be a death sentence. The Spartan ideal was a perfectly healthy, strong individual, destined to contribute fully to the military might of the Palace. There was no room for perceived frailty, no concept of nurturing those with special needs or offering rehabilitation. Imagine having your child's entire future, their very right to exist, decided in a few chilling moments by a panel of strangers, far more immediate and terrifying than simply waiting for a doctor's diagnosis in a modern hospital in, say, Denver, Colorado. If your child was deemed sound and robust, they would be allowed to live. A sigh of relief might escape you, but it would be fleeting, as this was merely the first hurdle. However, if your child was deemed unfit, the decision was swift and absolute. They would not be allowed to live within Spartan Society. This wasn't merely a suggestion, it was an irrevocable decree. A fascinating yet rarely discussed detail about the Spartan cradle. Birth and infanticide's shadow is the curious phenomenon of the whispered goodbyes, where, despite the state's harsh decrees, some Spartan mothers facing the agonizing reality of their infant being deemed unfit would sometimes perform small, almost imperceptible, and private rituals, perhaps a final gentle touch, a silent lullaby, or a hidden token placed near the abandoned infant at the site of the apothete or nearby. Not as an act of defiance, but as a deeply personal, clandestine attempt to acknowledge their lost child and express a final, unspoken farewell against the backdrop of state-enforced attachment, transforming a brutal necessity into a poignant, almost rebellious act of maternal grief and love. Imagine yourself, a Spartan mother, making a silent, agonizing journey to the chasm, leaving a tiny, handmade doll near the precipice, a deeply personal and often overlooked detail of the hidden emotional toll of Spartan ideology. It truly sucked to have to leave your child, but a silent goodbye might offer a fleeting comfort. The infants deemed unfit were taken to a place called the apothete, a chasm at the foot of Mount Tegetus. They were simply exposed there, left to die from the elements, hunger, or wild animals. There was no burial, no formal mourning, no acknowledgement of their brief life. This was not considered murder by Spartan society. It was seen as a necessary culling, an act for the greater good of the state. Imagine the chilling indifference of this practice, a stark contrast to the profound grief and elaborate funeral rites for lost infants in almost every other society. Ancient or modern, historians still widely debate the true number of infants subjected to this practice, and whether the accounts from later Greek writers, often biased against Sparta, exaggerated its frequency or scale, or if it was indeed a common and accepted aspect of Spartan demographic control for the parents, particularly the mothers. This was an unspeakable tragedy, yet one they were expected to endure with stoicism. Public displays of grief were discouraged, as personal sorrow was secondary to state necessity. You were expected to put the needs of Sparta before your own emotional pain. The very act of childbirth, often celebrated as a miracle in other cultures, was tinged with the constant fear of rejection and the potential for profound, unexpressed loss, even for the infants who passed the initial inspection. Their lives were far from idyllic. They remained with their mothers for only a short period, typically 7 years, before being taken away for the agoge, the brutal state-controlled education and training system. This meant that the bonding period was intensely brief, and parents knew from the outset that their child would soon be claimed by the state, destined for a life of rigorous training and military service. The emotional detachment began almost from birth. The Spartan cradle. Birth and infanticide's shadow is not just about a barbaric ancient practice. It's a chilling exploration of the absolute power of a totalitarian state over the individual, even over the most fundamental human bonds. It reveals a world where the very act of bringing life into existence was not a private family matter, but a public assessment, transforming the joyous beginning into a profound, often agonizing test of viability, and a terrifying testament to the hidden miseries woven into the very fabric of Spartan society. Often at the agonizing cost of a child's life and a parent's unexpressed grief, as you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps feeling the quiet comfort of your own child's safe slumber, your easy access to modern healthcare, and the secure knowledge that every child is cherished. Remember the ancient Spartan parent, their heart heavy with unspoken fear, their newborn silently awaiting judgment, a chilling testament to the terrible beginning of life in a society forged in iron. Let's gently return from the chilling threshold of the Spartan cradle birth and infanticide's shadow, where you, a modern person, felt the profound anxiety of a Spartan parent facing an elder's judgment. If Chapter 1 explored the brutal beginning of life, tonight we'll delve into the profound and early severance of the most fundamental human bond, the separation of child from family. We're going to explore the stark, often heartbreaking, reality of agoge's grip, early separation and state control, contemplating how, at the tender age of 7, Spartan boys were wrenched from their homes and thrust into a brutal, state-controlled training system designed to strip them of individual identity and forge them into unwavering instruments of the state. Revealing a profound paradox where ultimate communal strength was built upon the deliberate fragmentation of the family unit, making childhood a fleeting memory and personal affection a dangerous weakness in the relentless pursuit of military might. Imagine yourself, now, an ancient Spartan parent, not confidently dropping your 7-year-old off for their first day of 2nd grade. In, say, a nurturing public school in Boulder, Colorado, where emotional support and individual growth are paramount, but instead, standing silently, tearfully, as stern state officials come to your home to take your bewildered child away, knowing they may never truly return to your care. Picture yourself as a parent during a period of forced conscription in a harsh military dictatorship, where young children are systematically removed from their homes to be indoctrinated and trained as soldiers, with no possibility of opting out or protesting. Or consider a family in a historical orphanage or boarding school system where children are sent away at a very young age. Losing their parental bonds and being raised under strict, impersonal institutional control, far more immediate and less personally secure than simply watching your child grow and thrive within the loving confines of your own home in Atlanta, Georgia. The innocent laughter of your child, once a cherished sound, now mingles with the chilling silence of state authority and the unspoken fear of permanent separation, thick with the pervasive anxiety of a life balanced precariously on the edge of state command. This is the pervasive, often heartbreaking, reality of agoge's grip, early separation and state control, where the very essence of childhood and familial connection was deliberately sacrificed for the brutal demands of a warrior state, transforming the natural joy of raising a child into a profound, often agonizing act of surrender, and revealing a chilling truth that in this society forged in iron, individual lives were utterly secondary to the collective strength of the military, making emotional bonds a dangerous weakness and personal identity, a concept to be systematically erased. For Spartan boys, the brief period of childhood spent with their mothers, from birth to age 7, was merely a prelude. At the tender age of 7, their lives were irrevocably altered as they were taken from their homes to begin the agoge. Sparta's brutal, state-controlled education and training system. This wasn't like sending your child off to boarding school in, say, New England. This was a complete severance of familial ties, a deliberate stripping away of individual identity to forge an instrument of the state. It truly sucked to have your child taken away so young, knowing they would return a stranger, but it was the law. A common historical truth is that Spartan boys, at the age of 7, were indeed removed from their families and entered the agoge, a rigorous state-controlled training system designed to instill discipline, obedience, and military prowess, effectively making them wards of the state rather than their parents. Historians still widely debate the precise psychological impact of this early separation on both the children and their parents, and whether the emotional detachment fostered by the agoge contributed to or hindered Sparta's long-term social cohesion beyond its military effectiveness. The early separation was immediate and absolute. State officials, perhaps stern-faced men in military cloaks, would come to your home. There would be no lengthy goodbyes, no comforting words. Your child, still so young and vulnerable, and even would be taken away. likely bewildered and frightened. From that moment on, they ceased to be your son and became a son of Sparta, belonging entirely to the polis. Imagine the silent despair of a mother watching her child, still clinging to a toy or a worn blanket, led away by strangers, knowing that all the nurturing and love she had given him would now be replaced by harsh discipline and communal living. This wasn't a choice. It was an obligation, enforced by the full might of the state. Once in the agoge, boys were organized into age-based companies or platoons, living together in barracks under the supervision of older youths and state-appointed instructors. Their former names were largely replaced by group identity, individual possessions were minimal, and personal expression was discouraged. The goal was to break down any sense of individuality and foster absolute loyalty to the group and the state. There was no personal space, no privacy, no comforting familiarity of home. Imagine growing up in a military academy from the age of 7, where every moment is structured, every action observed, and personal identity is systematically erased. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed, detail about agoge's grip early separation and state control is the curious phenomenon of the whispered messages, where, despite the strict state control and limited contact, some Spartan mothers, unable to openly visit their sons in the agoge, would sometimes attempt to convey small, almost imperceptible estien. Messages, perhaps a special knot tied in a garment, a unique scent on a smuggled piece of dried fruit, or a coded hum in a distant public gathering to their children through a network of trusted older women or sympathetic family friends. Not as an act of defiance, but as a deeply personal, clandestine attempt to maintain a fleeting connection and offer a silent, unspoken reminder of familial love against the backdrop of state-enforced attachment. Transforming a simple gesture into a poignant, almost rebellious act of maternal affection in a system designed to suppress it. Imagine yourself, a Spartan boy, years into your training, recognizing a specific, almost forgotten scent on a piece of smuggled bread, a sudden, fleeting memory of your mother, a deeply personal and often overlooked detail of the enduring human need for connection in an isolating system. It truly sucked to be cut off from your family, but even a whisper could bring a moment of solace. The curriculum of the agoge was entirely geared towards creating loyal, disciplined, and effective soldiers. It focused on physical training, endurance, obedience, and the art of war. Academic subjects like reading, writing, or philosophy were minimal, serving only practical purposes. There was no room for intellectual curiosity, artistic expression, or individual pursuits. Every lesson, every exercise, every punishment was designed to instill the values of Spartan society, courage, discipline, and unwavering dedication to the polis. Imagine a school system where your entire education, from second grade through high school, is solely focused on physical conditioning and military tactics, with no electives, no art classes, and no opportunities for personal hobbies. Historians still widely debate the precise pedagogical methods employed in the agoge, and whether the system's emphasis on harsh discipline and physical endurance truly fostered superior military effectiveness, or if it also led to unforeseen psychological consequences for the Spartan citizens. The older boys in the agoge played a significant role in disciplining the younger ones, often acting as harsh enforcers of the system. This created a brutal hierarchy where might made right, and compassion was often seen as weakness. Bullying and physical abuse, while perhaps not officially sanctioned, were likely common, serving to harden the boys and prepare them for the rigors of military life. This was a system designed to create tough, unfeeling warriors, and it started with their earliest interactions. Even beyond physical training, the agoge sought to control every aspect of a boy's life. Their food was deliberately scarce, often just enough to prevent outright starvation, forcing them to learn resourcefulness, stealth, and even theft, a fascinating, yet grim, aspect we'll explore further in Warrior's Diet in Chapter 4. Their clothing was minimal, providing little comfort in harsh weather. Their beds were hard, often made of reeds, fostering resilience. Every discomfort, every deprivation, was a deliberate part of their training, preparing them for the rigors of campaigning and the brutal realities of war. The emotional detachment fostered by this system was profound. Children rarely saw their parents, and emotional displays were strongly discouraged. The bond between parent and child was systematically weakened, replaced by an unwavering loyalty to their fellow warriors in the state. This meant that when a child went off to war, or when parents lost a son in battle, the grief was expected to be stoic, personal, and brief. Subordinate to the greater good of Sparta, a tragic reality we'll touch on in the silent burden in Chapter 8. For girls, while they did not participate in the agoge in the same way, they too were subject to state control over their upbringing. Focused on physical fitness and preparing them to bear healthy Spartan children, a unique aspect we'll explore in Girls of Sparta in Chapter 6. Their lives, too, were not entirely their own, but dictated by the needs of the polis. The agoge's grip was long-lasting. Boys remained in the barracks until they were 20, transitioning directly into military service. They would become full citizens and soldiers, but the emotional scars of their early separation and brutal training would undoubtedly remain, shaping their identities forever. Their entire existence was a testament to the state's absolute power over the individual, a chilling example of state control taken to its ultimate extreme. Agoge's grip. Early separation and state control is not just about an ancient educational system. It's a chilling exploration of the absolute power of a totalitarian state over the individual and the deliberate fragmentation of the most fundamental human bonds. It reveals a world where the very essence of childhood and familial connection was deliberately sacrificed for the brutal demands of a warrior society, transforming the natural joy of raising a child into a profound, often agonizing act of surrender, and a terrifying testament to the hidden miseries woven into the very fabric of Spartan society, often at the cost of personal identity and the deepest emotional connections. As you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps feeling the quiet comfort of your own family's embrace, your child's laughter, and the secure knowledge that their upbringing is your sacred trust, remember the ancient Spartan parent, their heart heavy with the silence of a snatched childhood, their son's life consumed by the unforgiving grip of the agoge, a chilling testament to the terrible sacrifice demanded by a society forged in iron. Let's gently return from the firm, unforgiving grasp of agoge's grip, early separation and state control, where you, a modern person, felt the profound ache of a Spartan child being wrenched from their family. If Chapter 2 explored the deliberate shattering of familial bonds, tonight we'll delve into the relentless, often brutal, daily reality of their new existence. The ceaseless discipline, the pervasive hunger, and the almost unbearable physical and psychological torment designed to strip away all vestiges of individual weakness. We're going to explore the stark, often agonizing reality of harsh lessons discipline, hunger, and brutal training, contemplating how every waking moment of a Spartan boy's life was meticulously controlled, every comfort denied, and every transgression met with unyielding punishment, revealing a profound paradox where ultimate military prowess was forged through deliberate deprivation and psychological hardening, making childhood a relentless gauntlet and personal resilience a desperate, daily battle against overwhelming state authority. Imagine yourself now, an ancient Spartan boy, not confidently learning in a supportive classroom in, say, a modern suburban school in Austin, Texas, where emotional well-being and personalized learning are priorities, but instead shivering in thin clothing, feeling the constant gnawing of an empty stomach, and bracing yourself for the next physical ordeal or swift, merciless punishment, knowing that any display of weakness could lead to further torment. Picture yourself as a young cadet in a notoriously strict military academy during a harsh historical period, where physical discomfort is constant, rations are meager, and brutal discipline is meted out for even minor infractions, with no parental appeal or escape. Or consider a child forced into a harsh labor camp, perpetually hungry and exhausted, constantly under the watchful eyes of unfeeling overseers, where personal suffering is irrelevant to the demands of the system, far more immediate and less personally secure than simply enduring a challenging school project in a modern, comfortable home in Philadelphia. Pennsylvania, the innocent sounds of childhood, once a memory, are replaced by the sharp crack of a whip, the grumble of an empty stomach, and the rhythmic shouts of drill instructors, thick with the silent desperation of those living under a pervasive, unyielding regimen. This is the pervasive, often terrifying, reality of harsh lessons discipline, hunger, and brutal training, where the very essence of learning was not about intellectual growth, but about physical endurance and absolute obedience, transforming daily life into a continuous, high-stakes battle against discomfort and fear, and revealing a chilling truth that, in this warrior society, individual suffering was a deliberate tool for forging collective strength, making every moment of existence a profound test of resilience and a silent testament to the absolute power of the agoge over the very spirit of its young charges. Once snatched from their families and thrust into the agoge, Spartan boys entered a world defined by unrelenting discipline, pervasive hunger, and brutal training. This wasn't merely a rigorous education. It was a systematic process designed to break them down and rebuild them as unfeeling instruments of the state. Utterly loyal and physically formidable, their childhood, if it could even be called that, was a continuous gauntlet of deprivation and torment. It truly sucked to live every day in constant hunger and fear, but it was the Spartan way to forge warriors. A common historical truth is that the agoge subjected Spartan boys to a harsh regimen of physical training, minimal clothing, meager food rations, and strict discipline, often involving corporal punishment, all designed to harden them, instill obedience, and prepare them for a life of military service. Historians still widely debate the long-term psychological effects of such extreme deprivation and physical abuse on the Spartan psyche, and whether the system's focus on collective identity and military prowess ultimately hindered or fostered individual critical thinking and social adaptability. The discipline was constant and unyielding. Every aspect of their lives was regulated, from when they woke to when they slept, from how they ate to how they spoke. Obedience was paramount. Questioning authority was unthinkable. Punishments for disobedience, tardiness, or any perceived weakness were swift and severe, often involving flogging by older boys or their paidonomos, their agoge supervisor. Imagine living in a perpetual state of readiness for punishment, knowing that a single misstep could result in a painful beating, far more immediate and terrifying than simply getting a stern lecture from a teacher in a modern school in, say, Los Angeles, California. There was no concept of timeout or gentle reprimand. Discipline was physical and immediate. Their clothing was minimal, often just a single cloak, regardless of the weather. They were expected to endure the chilling Spartan winters and the scorching summers with little protection, fostering resilience and indifference to discomfort. Their beds were hard, made of reeds gathered by their own hands from the Eurotas River, designed for discomfort, not rest. Sleep was viewed as a luxury, a brief respite before the next round of training. Imagine sleeping on a bed of prickly reeds in an unheated barracks in, say, rural Maine, during a harsh winter, with only a thin blanket for warmth. The hunger was pervasive and deliberate. Their food rations were intentionally meager, designed to keep them just above starvation. This wasn't accidental, it was a pedagogical tool. By constantly depriving them of food, the Spartans aimed to teach resourcefulness, stealth, and self-reliance. Boys were encouraged, even expected to steal food from farms or homes, but if caught, they were severely punished, not for the theft itself, but for being caught. This forced them to develop cunning and agility, traits crucial for a warrior. Imagine constantly feeling the gnawing ache of an empty stomach, knowing you must risk severe punishment to find enough food to survive. In a military academy in, say, rural Georgia, a fascinating yet rarely discussed detail about harsh lessons discipline. Hunger and brutal training is the curious phenomenon of the silent food scramble, where, despite the strict hierarchy and ever-present hunger in the agoge barracks, Some older, more cunning boys would sometimes devise elaborate, clandestine methods of acquiring or distributing small, extra portions of food, perhaps from successful nocturnal foraging, or from sympathetic local helots among their immediate Syssitia mess group members. Not as an act of rebellion against the system, but as a deeply personal, almost ritualized, act of group loyalty and a silent, unspoken acknowledgement of their shared deprivation, transforming a simple meal into a poignant, almost desperate attempt to foster internal cohesion against the backdrop of state-enforced hunger. Imagine yourself a Spartan boy, participating in a covert exchange of a few stolen apples. The rustle of straw the only sound in the dark barracks, a deeply personal and often overlooked detail of the subtle ways they sought to alleviate their constant hunger and build bonds in a system designed to strip them of individual comforts. It truly sucked to be constantly hungry, but sharing a stolen meal could create an unbreakable bond. The physical training was relentless and brutal. They engaged in wrestling, running, jumping, and various forms of combat practice, often without proper protective gear. Injuries were common, but complaints were not tolerated. They were taught to endure pain without flinching, to fight through exhaustion, and to view physical suffering as a necessary part of their development. This wasn't about competitive sports in, say, a modern high school in Dallas, Texas. This was about preparing for the literal brutality of warfare, where mercy was a weakness. Historians still widely debate the long-term physical health consequences of the intense and often brutal training regimen of the agoge, and whether the Spartan emphasis on physical perfection and endurance ultimately led to a higher incidence of chronic injuries or a shorter lifespan among their warriors. Beyond physical conditioning, the agoge instilled mental and emotional hardening. Boys were encouraged to be laconic, speaking little and always to the point, fostering a stern, uncommunicative demeanor. Emotional displays, particularly those of fear, sadness, or tenderness, were severely discouraged, seen as signs of weakness. They were trained to face danger, pain, and death with unflinching resolve. This meant suppressing natural human emotions, a profound psychological toll. Imagine being taught from a young age that showing any emotion beyond stoicism is a weakness, effectively closing off your own feelings and those of others. The supervision was constant. The paedonomos and older boys rigorously monitored their every move, ready to correct any deviation from the Spartan ideal. There was no privacy, no personal space, no moments of true relaxation. Even their conversations were likely monitored, ensuring their thoughts aligned with state ideology. This constant scrutiny created a pervasive sense of fear and anxiety, where every action was a performance for the state. This brutal upbringing culminated in a harsh passage into adulthood. At the age of 20, they would complete the agoge and become full citizens and soldiers. But the lessons of their childhood, the hunger, the beatings, the constant fear, the forced emotional detachment, would be indelibly etched into their very beings. Their lives were a testament to the idea that true strength was forged through extreme hardship. A chilling example of brutal training pushed to its absolute limit. Harsh lessons. Discipline. Hunger and brutal training is not just about an ancient educational system. It's a chilling exploration of the deliberate dehumanization and relentless hardening of children for the sake of state power. It reveals a world where the very essence of learning was not about nurturing growth, but about inflicting deprivation and pain, transforming childhood into a continuous, high-stakes battle against discomfort and fear, and a terrifying testament to the hidden miseries woven into the very fabric of Spartan society. Often at the cost of innocence, emotional well-being, and the unyielding spirit of its young charges. As you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps feeling the quiet comfort of your own warm bed, your full stomach, and the secure knowledge that education should be nurturing. Remember the ancient Spartan boy, his body aching, his stomach growling, his spirit hardened by endless discipline. A chilling testament to the terrible price paid for Spartan might. Let's gently return from the agonizing reality of harsh lessons discipline. hunger, and brutal training, where you, a modern person, grimaced at the relentless physical and emotional torment inflicted upon Spartan boys. If Chapter 3 explored the methods of their hardening, tonight we'll delve specifically into one of the most pervasive and insidious forms of deprivation, the constant gnawing pangs of an empty stomach, meticulously engineered to forge resilience. Even at the cost of basic human comfort, we're going to explore the stark, often heartbreaking, reality of warriors' diet scarcity, malnutrition and Spartan broth, contemplating how the deliberate limitation of food, the pervasive threat of starvation, and the infamous unappetizing communal meals transformed every bite into a lesson in endurance, revealing a profound paradox where ultimate military might was built upon the relentless denial of basic sustenance, making every meal a meager, often nauseating, test of fortitude and every day a silent battle against overwhelming hunger. Imagine yourself now, an ancient Spartan boy, not confidently choosing from an abundance of fresh, nutritious options in a well-stocked cafeteria in, say, a modern high school in Orlando, Florida, where balanced meals and student well-being are prioritized, but instead feeling the persistent emptiness in your gut, the lightheadedness from insufficient calories, and the dull, metallic taste of a meager, unappetizing communal meal, knowing that this barely there sustenance is all you will get, and that the only way to get more is to steal. Picture yourself as a young soldier in a brutal, historical military campaign, where rations are constantly scarce, food is often unpalatable, and the threat of hunger is a constant companion, forcing you to forage or steal to survive, or consider a child in a severely underfunded historical orphanage, where meals are infrequent, portions are tiny, and the food itself is of the lowest quality, leaving you perpetually hungry and weakened, far more immediate and less personally secure than simply complaining about school lunch in a modern, comfortable home in Sacramento, California. The innocent anticipation of mealtime, once a joyous part of childhood, is replaced by the grim reality of barely there portions and the pervasive, almost animalistic sensation of hunger, thick with the silent desperation of those living under a pervasive, unyielding caloric deficit. This is the pervasive, often heartbreaking, reality of warriors' diet scarcity, malnutrition, and Spartan broth, where the very essence of nourishment was not about growth and well-being, but about inflicting deprivation and fostering cunning, transforming every meal into a continuous, high-stakes battle against hunger, and revealing a chilling truth that in this warrior society, individual hunger was a deliberate tool for forging collective strength, making every moment of existence a profound test of endurance and a silent testament to the absolute power of the agoge over the very bodies and spirits of its young charges. Once immersed in the rigorous agoge, Spartan boys quickly learned that their lives would be defined by scarcity, particularly when it came to food. Their daily existence was a battle against malnutrition, meticulously engineered by the state to harden their bodies and minds. This wasn't accidental deprivation. It was a deliberate pedagogical choice designed to forge resilient warriors, even if it meant enduring constant hunger and consuming truly unappetizing meals. It truly sucked to constantly feel the gnawing pangs of hunger, but it was the Spartan way to create tough soldiers. A common historical truth is that Spartan boys in the agoge were intentionally given meager food rations, barely enough for subsistence to encourage resourcefulness, harden them against privation, and even prompt them to steal food, a practice that, if successful, was admired for demonstrating cunning, but if caught, was punished for the failure to be discreet. Historians still widely debate the precise nutritional content of the Spartan diet and the long-term health implications of chronic caloric restriction and potential protein deficiencies on their overall physical development and longevity compared to other Greek city-states. Their food rations were notoriously meager, just enough to prevent outright starvation, but never enough to truly satisfy hunger or provide ample energy for their relentless physical training, a key aspect we covered in harsh lessons back in Chapter 3. This constant caloric deficit meant boys were perpetually hungry, a dull ache in their stomachs that served as a constant reminder of their Spartan training. Imagine being a growing boy, constantly running, wrestling, and training, while feeling the persistent emptiness in your stomach. Far more intense than simply being told to wait for dinner in a modern household in, say, suburban Phoenix, Arizona. This deliberate scarcity had a dual purpose. Firstly, it taught them endurance and resilience. They learned to function effectively even when hungry, preparing them for the privations of military campaigns where food might be scarce. Secondly, and perhaps more famously, it encouraged resourcefulness and cunning. Boys were expected to steal food, not from their fellow agoge members, but from local farms or other sources, without getting caught. If they were successful, it demonstrated the stealth and guile admired in a warrior. If they were caught, however, they were severely punished, not for the theft itself, but for their incompetence in being discovered. This was a grim game of cat and mouse, played out daily against the backdrop of their constant hunger. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed, detail about warriors' diet scarcity. Malnutrition and Spartan broth is the curious phenomenon of the communal hunger growl, where, during mealtimes in the agoge barracks, the collective, almost rhythmic, grumbling of empty stomachs amongst the Spartan boys, though never openly acknowledged or complained about, would sometimes become a subtle, shared auditory backdrop to their meager meals, not as an expression of discontent, but as a deeply personal, clandestine acknowledgement of their collective deprivation and a silent, unspoken bond forged through shared hunger, transforming a simple physiological response into a poignant, almost ritualized reminder of their common struggle for survival within the system's deliberate scarcity. Imagine yourself a Spartan boy, hearing the subtle symphony of empty stomachs around you, a silent affirmation of shared hardship as you picked at your meager portion, a deeply personal and often overlooked detail of the unspoken camaraderie born from deprivation. It truly sucked to always be hungry, but knowing others felt it too could offer a strange comfort. The most infamous element of the Spartan diet was undoubtedly the melas zomos, or black broth. This was a staple of their communal meals, a thick, dark concoction made primarily from boiled pig's legs, blood, and vinegar. It was notoriously unappetizing, even to the Spartans themselves. Accounts describe it as so foul that even a foreign visitor, upon tasting it, remarked that he understood why Spartans were so willing to die in battle. Imagine facing a bowl of this viscous, metallic-tasting stew, day after day, knowing it was your primary source of sustenance. This wasn't just bland, it was actively repulsive. Historians still widely debate the precise ingredients and preparation methods of melasomos, and whether its unpalatability was primarily a consequence of its ingredients. Poor cooking techniques, or exaggerated accounts from non-Spartan sources who sought to portray Spartan life as uniquely harsh, beyond the black broth, their diet was simple and sparse: some cheese, figs, and occasional meat from hunting or the rare successful theft. Fresh fruits and vegetables were likely minimal, leading to significant nutritional deficiencies. Growing boys need a diverse diet for proper development, but the Spartans prioritized hardening over holistic well-being. This chronic malnutrition likely impacted their long-term health, physical growth, and resistance to disease, a vulnerability we explored in A Threat of Disease back in Chapter 4. They might have been strong in battle, but their internal systems were often compromised. The communal dining in the Syssitia mess halls further reinforced their detachment from family and their loyalty to the group. Meals were eaten together, silently, fostering discipline and conformity. There was no opportunity for individual preferences or the comforting warmth of a family meal. Food was simply fuel, ingested to sustain the body for the next round of training. Imagine eating every single meal in a large, unadorned hall, surrounded by other boys, with no conversation and only the grim prospect of the unappetizing black broth. The constant struggle with hunger and the unappealing nature of their food likely contributed to a certain stoicism and indifference to pleasure. They learned to suppress desires, including the most fundamental one for satisfying food. This was another way the agoge sought to strip away their individuality and make them purely focused on their duty to the state, turning them into efficient, uncomplaining fighting machines, even when they became adult warriors. The practice of communal dining and simple utilitarian meals continued, reinforcing the values learned in their youth. The Spartan warriors' diet was a powerful symbol of their unique way of life, one of austerity, discipline, and constant preparation for the demands of war, even if it meant a life shadowed by the persistent gnawing of hunger. Their very bodies were forged not just by physical exercise, but by the relentless denial of basic nourishment, a testament to the idea that true strength lay in enduring hardship, even the hardship of an empty stomach. Warriors' diet, scarcity. Malnutrition in Spartan broth is not just about ancient eating habits. It's a chilling exploration of the deliberate use of deprivation as a tool for shaping human behavior and forging societal ideals. It reveals a world where the very essence of nourishment was not about well-being, but about hardening and control, transforming every meal into a continuous, high-stakes battle against hunger, and a terrifying testament to the hidden miseries woven into the very fabric of Spartan society, often at the agonizing cost of constant hunger, chronic malnutrition, and the daily ordeal of the infamous black broth as you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps feeling the quiet comfort of your own full stomach, your easy access to delicious and varied foods, and the secure knowledge that nourishment is a right. Remember the ancient Spartan boy, his stomach aching, his body weakened, his spirit hardened by endless hunger, a chilling testament to the terrible price paid for Spartan might. Let's gently return from the hollow ache of warriors' diet scarcity. Malnutrition and Spartan broth, where you, a modern person, felt the pervasive hunger that defined a Spartan boy's daily existence. If Chapter 4 explored the deliberate denial of sustenance, tonight we'll delve into the grim culmination of their brutal upbringing, the abrupt cessation of anything resembling childhood, and the relentless plunge into the terrifying reality of military life, where failure was not merely a setback, but a crushing social disgrace. We're going to explore the stark, often heartbreaking, reality of childhood's end, military life and fear of failure, contemplating how the transition from the agoge was not a graduation into freedom, but an immediate immersion into a lifetime of perilous service, where every action was scrutinized for its contribution to the state, revealing a profound paradox where ultimate communal survival was built upon the relentless suppression of individual hopes and the constant, chilling fear of falling short, making adulthood a perpetual test of obedience and personal identity, a concept utterly subsumed by the demands of warfare. Imagine yourself, now, an ancient Spartan young man, not confidently embarking on a diverse career path or embracing personal passions after high school in, say, a thriving metropolis like New York City. New York, with endless possibilities and second chances, but instead feeling the cold, heavy weight of your newly issued shield, the constant drill of military maneuvers, and the pervasive fear of public humiliation if you falter, knowing that your entire worth is now tied to your performance on the battlefield, and any perceived cowardice will bring indelible shame. Picture yourself as a young adult in a highly militarized historical society, where mandatory conscription at a very young age leads directly into a lifetime of service, with no alternative career paths or personal choices, and the constant threat of public disgrace for any perceived weakness. Or consider a new recruit in a notoriously harsh historical army, where every day is a test of your courage. Every mistake is punished severely, and the only escape is death or dishonor, far more immediate and less personally secure than simply facing the pressures of a competitive job market in modern Chicago. Illinois. The innocent dreams of youth, once a distant possibility, are replaced by the rhythmic beat of marching feet, the clang of weapons, and the chilling whispers of potential disgrace. thick with the silent desperation of those living under a pervasive, unyielding military imperative. This is the pervasive, often terrifying reality of childhood's end, military life and fear of failure, where the very essence of adulthood was not about personal growth, but about unwavering military service and the constant dread of perceived inadequacy, transforming life itself into a continuous, high-stakes battle for honor and survival, and revealing a chilling truth that in this warrior society, individual lives were utterly secondary to the collective strength of the phalanx, making personal ambition a dangerous illusion and self-worth a precarious commodity, constantly measured against the unforgiving standards of the battlefield. For a Spartan boy, the conclusion of the agoge at the age of 20 was not a moment of liberation or a transition into a diverse adulthood. Instead, it marked childhood's end and an immediate, lifelong immersion into military life. There was no concept of a gap year, no going off to college or pursuing a trade. Their destiny was singular to be a soldier, a guardian of Sparta. This wasn't about choosing a military career in, say, modern military academies in West Point, New York. This was an enforced, inescapable reality, for which their entire lives had been brutally designed. It truly sucked to have your entire future dictated by the state from birth. But freedom of choice was a luxury Spartans didn't possess. A common historical truth is that Spartan males, upon completing the agoge at age 20, were immediately inducted into full military service, remaining active until age 60, and their lives were completely dominated by military training, communal living, and the constant readiness for warfare. Historians still widely debate the extent to which individual Spartans truly embraced this lifelong military ethos, or if there was an underlying current of private resentment or hidden desires for a different kind of life despite the overwhelming societal pressure for conformity. At 20, a Spartan man became a full citizen, a homoios, gaining the right to participate in the assembly and share in the communal messes, syssitia. But this citizenship came with an absolute obligation, lifelong military service. Their lives continued to be communal, sleeping in barracks with their fellow soldiers, eating in the syssitia, and constantly drilling. Even if married, they were expected to primarily live in the barracks until age 30, only visiting their wives and families discreetly. Imagine being a young adult in, say, suburban Washington, D.C., and instead of getting your own apartment and starting a career, you're still living in a military barracks, perpetually training, and only allowed to visit your spouse on the sly. The fear of failure was a constant, pervasive shadow over their lives, even more so than during their agoge training. In Sparta, military prowess and courage were paramount. To show cowardice in battle, to abandon one's shield a symbol of loyalty to the polis, or to fail in one's duty was the ultimate disgrace. A Spartan who displayed cowardice was subjected to severe public humiliation. They might be ostracized from the syssitia, stripped of their citizenship rights, forced to wear distinctive, humiliating clothing, and be physically abused by anyone who chose to do so. They became outcasts, pariahs in their own society. Imagine the overwhelming pressure to perform flawlessly in battle, knowing that failure would not only mean death, but a life of abject humiliation and social death in your own community. This wasn't just losing a game. This was losing everything. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed, detail about childhood's end. Military life and fear of failure is the curious phenomenon of the ritualized shield polishing, where, particularly before a significant campaign or battle, some Spartan warriors would meticulously and repeatedly polish their bronze shields, not just for practical maintenance, but as a deeply personal, almost meditative ritual that served as a clandestine form of psychological self-affirmation, and a silent, unspoken promise to themselves and their comrades that they would never abandon it, the shield being a symbol of personal honor and the phalanx's strength, transforming a simple chore into a poignant, almost desperate attempt to steel their nerves against the pervasive fear of failure and the chilling prospect of losing their thymos honor, jace ass spirit. Imagine yourself, A Spartan warrior, silently rubbing your shield, its gleaming surface reflecting your own stern face. A deeply personal and often overlooked detail of the immense psychological pressure they face to uphold their honor. It truly sucked to live with such constant fear of disgrace, but the gleam of a polished shield might offer a fleeting resolve, the focus on discipline and obedience. A key lesson from harsh lessons in Chapter 3 continued unabated. Every order from a superior officer was to be followed without question. Individual initiative was subsumed by the needs of the phalanx, the tightly packed, impenetrable formation that was the bedrock of Spartan military might. Their lives revolved around drill, strategy, and constant readiness for war. They were, quite literally, human machines of battle. Historians still widely debate the long-term mental health consequences of living under such intense societal pressure and the pervasive fear of failure for Spartan warriors, and whether this environment contributed to higher rates of depression, anxiety, or other psychological conditions despite their outward stoicism. Their training continued even into adulthood. They participated in mock battles, hunting expeditions, and further physical conditioning. The goal was to maintain peak physical form and tactical proficiency at all times. There was no true downtime, no opportunity to pursue personal interests or hobbies outside of their military duties. Their minds and bodies were perpetually dedicated to the state's defense. Imagine a life where your only hobby is intense physical training and preparing for war. A stark contrast to the diverse leisure activities of modern American adults. The pervasive lack of privacy and communal living, a core aspect of the agoge, as we remember from Agoge's grip in Chapter 2, persisted. They ate, slept, and trained alongside their fellow soldiers for decades. This forged an incredibly strong bond among the warriors, a powerful sense of brotherhood that was arguably Sparta's greatest strength. But it came at the cost of individual autonomy and privacy, a far cry from the modern American ideal of personal space. Even the concept of family life was fundamentally altered by this military imperative. Marriage was encouraged, but primarily for the purpose of procreating future soldiers. Husbands and wives spent little time together, with the men residing in the barracks until age 30. This meant that the emotional bonds within the nuclear family were often weaker than the bonds between soldiers in the Syssitia. Reinforcing the state's primacy over personal relationships, a poignant echo of parental absence in Chapter 7. The relentless expectation of sacrifice was paramount. Spartans were taught that the most glorious death was to fall in battle for Sparta. Mothers famously told their sons to return with your shield or on it, a clear instruction to either win honorably or die trying. This indoctrination, hammered home since childhood, meant that facing death was not just a possibility, but an honorable culmination of their lives. Childhood's end. Military life and fear of failure is not just about the specific transition to adulthood in ancient Sparta. It's a chilling exploration of a society built entirely around warfare, where individual lives were utterly subsumed by the demands of the state. It reveals a world where the very essence of adulthood was not about personal growth or diverse pursuits, but about unwavering military service and the constant dread of perceived inadequacy, transforming life itself into a continuous, high-stakes battle for honor and survival, and a terrifying testament to the hidden miseries woven into the very fabric of Spartan society, often at the cost of individual freedom, personal dreams, and the ever-present fear of an inglorious end. As you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps feeling the quiet comfort of your own personal choices, your secure future, and the secure knowledge that your worth is not solely defined by your physical prowess. Remember the ancient Spartan warrior, his shield heavy, his spirit vigilant, forever shadowed by the fear of failure, a chilling testament to the terrible price paid for Spartan might. Let's gently return from the grim, unyielding reality of childhood's end, military life and fear of failure, where you, a modern person, felt the pervasive dread of a Spartan man whose entire worth was tied to his battlefield performance. If Chapter 5 explored the path of the male warrior, Tonight we'll turn our gaze to the often overlooked, yet equally demanding, path of the Spartan female. We're going to explore the stark, often paradoxical, reality of girls of Sparta rigor, athletics and reproductive pressure, contemplating how, unlike their counterparts in other Greek city-states who were largely confined to domestic roles, Spartan girls underwent their own rigorous, state-sanctioned training focused on physical prowess and mental fortitude, not for direct combat, but for the ultimate vital purpose of producing strong, healthy offspring for the warrior state, revealing a profound paradox where unusual female freedom came with the immense, unyielding pressure to be a perfect biological instrument for the perpetuation of the very system that shaped their lives. Imagine yourself now, an ancient Spartan girl, not confidently pursuing academic excellence or artistic talents in a diverse, modern school in, say, San Francisco, California, where gender equality and individual expression are celebrated, but instead feeling the persistent ache of trained muscles, the exhilaration of athletic competition, and the quiet understanding that every leap, every throw, every race is ultimately in service of a singular, biological imperative to bear strong sons for Sparta. Picture yourself as a young woman in a historical society where physical fitness is paramount, not for personal empowerment, but solely to ensure a robust lineage for a ruling elite, with intense pressure to marry and procreate, or consider a female athlete in a highly specialized, state-sponsored program where individual achievements are celebrated. But every triumph is ultimately framed by its contribution to a national goal, often ignoring personal desires or alternative life paths, far more immediate and less personally secure than simply participating in school sports for fun and fitness in a modern suburban home in Charlotte. North Carolina, the rhythmic thud of bare feet on the training ground, once a symbol of youthful energy, now mingles with the hushed whispers of societal expectations and the unspoken burden of future maternity, thick with the silent determination of those living under a pervasive, unyielding biological imperative. This is the pervasive, often empowering yet ultimately confining, reality of girls of Sparta rigor, athletics and reproductive pressure, where the very essence of female upbringing was not about intellectual or emotional development, but about physical excellence and reproductive fitness, transforming childhood into a continuous, high-stakes preparation for biological duty, and revealing a chilling truth that in this warrior society, female strength was highly valued, but ultimately served a singular, state-defined purpose, making personal identity a concept utterly subsumed by the demands of demographic perpetuation. While the agoge primarily shaped Spartan boys, the girls of Sparta also endured a unique and rigorous upbringing, starkly different from that of their counterparts in other ancient Greek city-states like Athens. Their lives were not cloistered or confined to the home. Instead, they underwent their own form of state-sanctioned training, focused on rigor and athletics, all for the ultimate purpose of fulfilling their reproductive pressure, bearing healthy children for Sparta. This wasn't about joining a cheerleading squad or a debate club in, say, a modern American high school. This was about a societal expectation that defined their very existence. It truly sucked to have your body and life so entirely geared towards a singular biological purpose. But it was the Spartan way. A common historical truth is that Spartan girls, unlike most other ancient Greek women, received state-sponsored physical education, including wrestling, running, and throwing, with the primary aim of making them strong and healthy mothers capable of bearing robust warrior sons for the state. Historians still widely debate the precise extent of intellectual education afforded to Spartan girls, and whether their relative physical freedom translated into a greater degree of social autonomy or political influence compared to women in other Greek poleis. Unlike Athenian women, who were largely confined to the gynoecium women's quarters and focused on domestic duties, Spartan girls were encouraged, even compelled, to engage in intense physical training. They ran, wrestled, threw javelins and discus, and participated in various athletic competitions. They often trained in public, sometimes with minimal clothing, which shocked other Greeks. This wasn't for entertainment, it was for a serious, state-mandated purpose. Imagine a young girl in, say, rural Alabama, being trained from childhood to be an Olympic-level athlete, not for personal glory, but solely to ensure she grows up strong enough to bear healthy children for her community. The rationale behind this physical regimen was clear. Strong mothers produce strong children. The Spartans believed that a healthy, physically capable mother would be more likely to bear robust sons who could endure the rigors of the agoge, as we remember from Agoge's grip in Chapter 2, and become formidable warriors. The strength of the state literally depended on the physical well-being of its future generations. And that began with the physical conditioning of its girls, a fascinating, yet rarely discussed detail about girls of Sparta rigor. Athletics and reproductive pressure is the curious phenomenon of the communal laughter chants, where, during their rigorous athletic training sessions, Spartan girls would sometimes engage in rhythmic, often spontaneous, laughter or playful chants, not as a sign of disrespect for their serious purpose, but as a deeply personal, clandestine outlet for their youthful energy and a silent, unspoken form of camaraderie and psychological release against the backdrop of their demanding routine and the immense pressure to perform, transforming a shared physical exertion into a poignant, almost rebellious act of girlish joy and a fleeting moment of self-expression within a system designed for disciplined conformity. Imagine yourself a Spartan girl, breathless after a race, exchanging a quick, suppressed giggle with your friend, the sound almost swallowed by the wind, a deeply personal and often overlooked detail of the subtle ways they found moments of levity amidst their stern upbringing. It truly sucked to be under such constant pressure, but a shared laugh could lighten the burden, even for a moment. Beyond physical training, Spartan girls also received some form of education, though its precise nature and depth are still debated by historians. It likely included music, dance, and possibly some literary instruction, but always with a focus on instilling Spartan values, discipline, obedience, and loyalty to the state. The goal was not to foster intellectual curiosity for its own sake, but to create well-rounded individuals who understood and upheld the Spartan ethos. Imagine a curriculum in, say, a strict boarding school in rural Massachusetts, where every lesson from history to music is designed to reinforce a singular, overriding national ideology. Historians still widely debate the extent to which Spartan girls received formal intellectual education beyond basic literacy and moral instruction, and whether their relative social freedom compared to other Greek women actually translated into greater personal agency or political influence within Spartan society. The reproductive pressure was immense. The ultimate purpose of a Spartan girl's upbringing was to become a wife and mother, capable of bearing strong sons. This wasn't merely a social expectation, it was a societal imperative. Marriage was encouraged at a relatively young age, and the ability to produce healthy offspring, particularly male offspring, was a source of great honor. Conversely, infertility or the inability to produce male heirs could bring considerable social stigma. Imagine the pressure of knowing that your entire worth to society hinges on your ability to produce a healthy son. A stark contrast to the diverse definitions of success for women in modern American society, this pressure could lead to challenging situations. In some cases, if a man's wife was infertile, it was permissible for him to arrange for another man to impregnate her, or for him to have children with another woman, as long as the children were still considered Spartan and benefited the state. While seemingly liberating in some ways, allowing women to produce heirs even with infertile husbands, it underscored the extent to which their bodies and reproductive capacities were viewed as resources for the state, rather than matters of purely personal choice. Even after marriage and childbirth, the Spartan woman's life continued to be intertwined with the state's demands. While men primarily lived in the barracks, Spartan women managed the households and considerable estates, as Spartan women could own land. Unlike women in many other Greek states, this gave them significant economic power and administrative responsibilities. However, this power was still ultimately in service of the state, managing resources to support the warrior class and produce future generations. Their freedom was a freedom within the system, not a freedom from it. The unique status of Spartan women, often admired by outsiders for their physical prowess and relative independence, came with its own set of burdens. Their lives were meticulously designed from birth to serve the state's military and demographic needs. Their strength, their education, and their very bodies were not for their own individual fulfillment, but for the perpetuation of the warrior society. The freedom they experienced was, ultimately, a functional freedom, designed to make them efficient biological instruments for Sparta. Girls of Sparta rigor. Athletics and reproductive pressure is not just about the specific upbringing of ancient Spartan females. It's a profound exploration of how societal roles, even seemingly progressive ones, can still be fundamentally dictated by overarching state imperatives. It reveals a world where the very essence of female development was not about personal agency, but about physical excellence and reproductive fitness, transforming childhood into a continuous, high-stakes preparation for biological duty, and a powerful testament to the hidden complexities woven into the very fabric of Spartan society, often at the cost of individual choice and the ultimate subjugation to the demands of demographic perpetuation. As you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps feeling the quiet comfort of your own personal freedoms, your diverse life choices, and the secure knowledge that your worth is not determined by your reproductive capacity. Remember the ancient Spartan girl, her muscles aching, her spirit resolute, forever shaped by the invisible threads of state expectation, a chilling testament to the terrible, unique demands placed on the daughters of Sparta. Let's gently return from the remarkable, yet ultimately demanding, world of girls of Sparta rigor, athletics and reproductive pressure, where you, a modern person, marveled at the unique physical training of Spartan women, yet recognized the underlying biological imperative. If Chapter 6 explored the specific path of Spartan girls, tonight we'll delve into a profound absence that permeated every Spartan family, the systematic and deliberate suppression of deep emotional connection between parents and children. We're going to explore the stark, often heartbreaking, reality of parental absence, emotional detachment and limited contact, contemplating how the state's relentless interference in family life, from early separation to communal living, fostered a pervasive emotional distance, transforming the natural warmth of familial bonds into a utilitarian relationship, revealing a profound paradox where ultimate communal strength was built upon the deliberate weakening of the very human ties that bind a family, making personal affection a dangerous weakness and genuine intimacy a rarity in the relentless pursuit of military might. Imagine yourself, now, an ancient Spartan parent, not confidently sharing daily joys and sorrows with your children, offering comforting hugs and endless encouragement in a loving home in, say, a nurturing suburban community in Denver, Colorado, where emotional connection is paramount, but instead feeling the quiet void of your child's physical absence, the awkwardness of infrequent formal visits, and the chilling understanding that the state actively discourages deep personal bonds, knowing that your children are being deliberately molded to prioritize the polis above all else. Picture yourself as a parent during a period of forced collective upbringing in a highly ideological historical state, where children are raised in state institutions, and parental visits are rare and heavily monitored, leading to a profound emotional estrangement. Or consider a family in a historical military boarding school system, where children are sent away at a very young age and only return home for brief, formal holidays, resulting in a permanent emotional distance and a strained relationship with their parents. Far more immediate and less personally secure than simply managing your busy schedule to spend quality time with your family in a modern, comfortable home in Phoenix, Arizona. The faint memory of youthful laughter, once a comforting sound, now mingles with the chilling silence of enforced separation and the unspoken burden of emotional suppression, thick with the pervasive anxiety of a life where the most fundamental human connections are deliberately severed. This is the pervasive, often heartbreaking, reality of parental absence, emotional detachment and limited contact, where the very essence of familial love and intimate connection was deliberately sacrificed for the brutal demands of a warrior state, transforming the natural warmth of a home into a cold, utilitarian arrangement, and revealing a chilling truth that in this society forged in iron, individual affections were utterly secondary to the collective strength of the military, making emotional bonds a dangerous weakness and genuine intimacy a concept to be systematically suppressed. For Spartan parents, the act of raising children was not a journey of nurturing, continuous bonding, and shared experiences, as we understand it in modern American society. Instead, their lives were profoundly shaped by parental absence, emotional detachment, and severely limited contact with their offspring. The Spartan state, with its unwavering focus on military strength, deliberately engineered a system that prioritized loyalty to the polis over the warmth of family, effectively severing the deepest human connections. It truly sucked to love your child, but be forced to keep them at arm's length. But such was the Spartan way. A common historical truth is that Spartan parents, particularly mothers, had very limited interaction with their sons after the age of 7 due to the agoge's communal upbringing, fostering a unique form of emotional detachment where loyalty to the state superseded familial bonds. Historians still widely debate the precise psychological impact of this enforced emotional distance on both the children and their parents, and whether it led to a heightened sense of collective identity or, conversely, to unexpressed grief and a deeper, hidden personal isolation. The root of this absence began with the early separation, a defining feature from agoge's grip in Chapter 2. At age 7, boys were taken from their homes and moved into communal barracks, becoming wards of the state. From that moment on, their daily lives were entirely dictated by the agoge, under the supervision of older boys and instructors, not their parents. For the next 13 years, until they were 20, their contact with their families was sporadic and minimal at best. Imagine dropping your child off for kindergarten, only to know they wouldn't truly live with you again until they were adults. Their entire upbringing controlled by an external, unyielding authority. This physical distance naturally led to emotional detachment. Spartan ideology actively discouraged strong emotional bonds within the family. Public displays of affection were rare, and personal sentimentality was seen as a weakness that could compromise a warrior's resolve. Parents were expected to be stoic, showing little overt emotion, even when their children were taken away or died in battle, a grim reality we'll explore in The Silent Burden in Chapter 8. This fostered a culture where deep emotional connection was suppressed, replaced by a utilitarian focus on producing and training soldiers for the state. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed, detail about parental absence, emotional detachment, and limited contact is the curious phenomenon of the ritualized visitation gaze, where, during the rare public festivals or processions where agoge boys might march past their families, some Spartan parents, particularly mothers, would attempt to catch their son's eye with a brief, almost imperceptible look of acknowledgement or pride, not as an overt display of affection, which was discouraged, but as a deeply personal, clandestine attempt to silently convey their enduring connection, and a silent, unspoken reminder of familial identity against the backdrop of state-enforced detachment, transforming a public spectacle into a poignant, almost desperate attempt to bridge the emotional chasm. Imagine yourself a Spartan mother, standing in the crowd, your heart aching as your son marches past, catching his eye for a fleeting second, a deeply personal and often overlooked detail of the desperate search for connection in an emotionally sterile environment. It truly sucked to have such limited interaction, but a brief glance could speak volumes. Limited contact was the norm. Parents might occasionally see their sons during public ceremonies or festivals, but private visits to the barracks were heavily restricted, if permitted at all. The boys were meant to see their fellow trainees and instructors as their primary family, fostering unwavering loyalty to their military unit. Even after males reached adulthood and became full citizens, they continued to live in the barracks until age 30, only visiting their wives and families discreetly, often at night, further limiting the development of deep emotional bonds within the nuclear family unit. Historians still widely debate the precise nature and frequency of parental contact with children in the agoge, and whether the accounts from ancient sources, often critical of Sparta, accurately portray the complete emotional severing of family ties, or if there were unrecorded informal channels for parental influence and affection. For mothers, this meant a profound sacrifice. They bore the children, nurtured them for their earliest years, only to then hand them over to the state, knowing they would largely be alienated from them emotionally and physically. Their role became that of a producer of future warriors rather than a primary nurturer. Imagine giving birth to a child, raising them for 7 years, and then knowing that your emotional investment will be systematically undone by the state, replaced by a rigid, unfeeling system. This system of emotional detachment extended to fathers as well. Their lives were consumed by military training and communal living. Any paternal role was minimal, often limited to instilling the stern values of the agoge during the brief periods a son might be home before age 7. The ideal Spartan father was not one who offered hugs and emotional support, but one who instilled discipline and prepared his son for the harsh realities of military life. Echoing the brutal training they themselves received a brutal reality from harsh lessons in Chapter 3. The consequence of this pervasive absence and detachment was a society where personal relationships were secondary to civic duty. While Spartans were fiercely loyal to their polis and their fellow soldiers, the individual family unit, as a source of emotional comfort and personal identity, was deliberately weakened. This created a culture of stoicism, resilience, but also perhaps a certain emotional void. They were strong, unyielding warriors, but perhaps at the cost of their deeper humanity. The unique social structure meant that even the act of marriage was often utilitarian, focused on procreation for the state rather than romantic love or deep personal partnership. While Spartan women had more freedom and economic power than their Athenian counterparts, their primary social function was still tied to reproduction, a significant point from Girls of Sparta in Chapter 6, further emphasizing the state's control over family life. Parental absence. Emotional detachment and limited contact is not just about the specific family dynamics of ancient Sparta. It's a chilling exploration of how a totalitarian state can systematically dismantle the most fundamental human bonds for its own purposes. It reveals a world where the very essence of familial love and intimate connection was deliberately sacrificed for the brutal demands of a warrior society, transforming the natural warmth of a home into a cold, utilitarian arrangement, and a terrifying testament to the hidden miseries woven into the very fabric of Spartan society, often at the agonizing cost of personal connection, emotional intimacy, and the profound, unexpressed yearning for familial warmth. As you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps feeling the quiet comfort of your own family's love, your child's embrace, and the secure knowledge that your emotional bonds are cherished. Remember the ancient Spartan parent, their heart heavy with unspoken longing, their children molded by the state, a chilling testament to the terrible sacrifice demanded by a society forged in iron. Let's gently return from the silent, aching void of parental absence, emotional detachment, and limited contact, where you, a modern person, felt the profound weight of a Spartan family's emotional distance. If Chapter 7 explored the deliberate weakening of familial bonds, tonight we'll delve into the most heart-wrenching consequence of their warrior society, the pervasive reality of loss and the chilling societal expectation that personal grief must be suppressed for the greater glory of the state. We're going to explore the stark, often unbearable reality of the silent burden loss. Grief and societal expectation, contemplating how, in a society constantly at war, death was an ever-present specter, and the emotional toll on parents, particularly mothers, was immense. Yet they were forbidden from expressing their sorrow openly, transforming profound personal tragedy into a private agony, revealing a profound paradox where ultimate communal triumph was built upon the relentless suppression of individual human suffering, making every death a test of stoicism and every tear a dangerous display of weakness in the relentless pursuit of military might. Imagine yourself, now, an ancient Spartan parent, Not confidently seeking counseling or leaning on a supportive community after the loss of a child in, say, a compassionate modern society in New Orleans, Louisiana, where grief is acknowledged and openly mourned, but instead, standing rigid, impassive, as news of your son's death in battle arrives, knowing that any public display of sorrow will bring shame upon your family, and that your deepest pain must be swallowed whole for the sake of the state. Picture yourself as a parent in a wartime historical society where patriotic fervor demands the suppression of individual sorrow, and public grieving for fallen soldiers is discouraged or even condemned as unpatriotic. Or consider a family in a highly authoritarian historical regime, where personal tragedies are deliberately downplayed and emotional displays are viewed as signs of weakness that could undermine collective morale, forcing you to mourn in absolute secrecy. Far more immediate and less personally secure than simply allowing yourself to weep openly after a profound loss in a modern, supportive home in Nashville, Tennessee. The comforting memories of your lost child, once a source of gentle warmth, now mingle with the chilling silence of enforced stoicism and the unspoken burden of unexpressed sorrow, thick with the pervasive anxiety of a life where the most fundamental human emotions are deliberately crushed. This is the pervasive, often heartbreaking reality of the silent burden loss, grief and societal expectation, where the very essence of human sorrow and profound loss was deliberately sacrificed for the brutal demands of a warrior state, transforming natural grief into a profound, often agonizing act of emotional suppression, and revealing a chilling truth that in this society forged in iron, individual suffering was utterly secondary to the collective strength of the military, making every death a test of ideological purity and every unwept tear a silent testament to the absolute power of the agoge over the very spirit of its people. In a society built on warfare, death was an inevitable and frequent visitor. For Spartan parents, particularly mothers, the constant threat of losing a child in battle was a terrifying reality, one they were expected to face with an almost inhuman stoicism. Loss and grief were profound, yet they were burdened by a heavy, silent burden due to overwhelming societal expectations that demanded the suppression of personal sorrow for the greater good of Sparta. This wasn't about finding a healthy outlet for your emotions in, say, a modern grief support group in Los Angeles, California. This was about burying your pain deep inside for the sake of the state. It truly sucked to lose a child and not even be allowed to cry. But such was the Spartan way. A common historical truth is that Spartan society famously emphasized the suppression of personal grief, particularly for mothers who lost sons in battle, with public mourning being minimal and private sorrow expected to be overcome for the sake of demonstrating unwavering dedication to the state. Historians still widely debate the true psychological toll of this enforced stoicism on Spartan individuals, and whether such emotional suppression contributed to a unique form of resilience, or, conversely, led to higher rates of unexpressed trauma or internal suffering among the populace. The Spartan state's ultimate goal was military supremacy, and this required an absolute willingness to sacrifice individual lives for the collective. From the moment a boy entered the agoge, as we remember from Agoge's grip in Chapter 2, he was indoctrinated with the idea that the most glorious death was to fall in battle for Sparta. This prepared the sons for death, but it also prepared the parents for loss. When news arrived that a son had fallen in battle, the expectation for the parents, and especially the mother, was one of unflinching stoicism. There were no public lamentations, no wailing, no tearing of hair, as was common in other ancient Greek societies. Displays of excessive grief were seen as a weakness, a betrayal of Spartan ideals, and a sign that personal feeling trumped loyalty to the polis. Imagine receiving the most devastating news of your life in, say, a small town in rural Georgia during wartime, but being expected to stand tall, emotionless, knowing that any tear or gasp of pain would be judged by your entire community as a sign of disloyalty. A famous anecdote, perhaps apocryphal but indicative of the Spartan ideal, tells of a Spartan mother who, upon hearing of her son's deaths in battle, simply inquired, Did they die for Sparta? And upon being told yes, replied, then let us prepare for the celebration. This extreme example highlights the profound pressure on parents to display absolute devotion to the state, even in the face of unimaginable personal tragedy. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed, detail about the silent burden loss. Grief and societal expectation is the curious phenomenon of the whispered remembrance knot, where, despite the strict societal rules against overt mourning for fallen sons, some Spartan mothers would sometimes tie a small, almost imperceptible knot in a specific piece of their weaving or a garment they wore daily, not as a recognized symbol of grief, but as a deeply personal, clandestine act of silent remembrance and a tangible and unspoken acknowledgement of their lost child, transforming a simple thread into a poignant, almost rebellious repository of private sorrow against the backdrop of enforced stoicism. Imagine yourself a Spartan mother, fingers deftly working the loom, tying a tiny, hidden knot, a silent tear perhaps mingling with the threads, a deeply personal and often overlooked detail of the desperate need to mourn when overt expression was forbidden. It truly sucked to have to hide your grief, but a whispered remembrance could keep a loved one's memory alive. Burial practices also reflected this austere approach to death. Spartan warriors who died in battle were often buried on the battlefield, or their remains returned to Sparta and interred in simple, unadorned graves. Unlike other Greeks who would lavish epitaphs and ornate monuments on their dead, Spartans were allowed a name inscribed on their tombstone only if they died in battle, or for women. If they died in childbirth, a powerful parallel we'll explore in A Mother's Plight in Chapter 9. This reinforced the idea that the only worthy deaths were those in service to the state, further diminishing the individual's life outside of military contribution. Historians still widely debate the extent to which these public expressions of stoicism genuinely reflected the internal emotional state of Spartan parents, or if such extreme societal pressure simply forced grief underground, leading to unacknowledged psychological burdens within the private sphere. For those who survived their sons, the absence of public mourning rites or even a shared community of grief meant that sorrow was a deeply private agony. There were no formal rituals to process their loss, no communal expressions of sympathy to lean on. Parents were left to bear their pain alone, expected to quickly resume their duties to the state, as if nothing had happened. This relentless suppression of natural human emotion must have taken an immense psychological toll. Imagine losing your child in a tragic accident in, say, suburban Detroit, Michigan, and being told by your community that showing any sadness is a sign of weakness and disrespect to your country. The Spartan system demanded total emotional control. It cultivated individuals who were tough, unfeeling in battle, and resilient in the face of hardship. But this came at a profound human cost. The ability to mourn, to connect emotionally with loss, is a fundamental human need. By denying this, Sparta perhaps created formidable warriors, but also individuals who carried immense, unexpressed burdens of sorrow. This silent burden wasn't just about the immediate loss of a child. It was also about the years of parental absence and limited contact, as we explored in Chapter 7, which meant that the bonds forged were perhaps not as deep as in other societies. Yet the loss was no less real. The cumulative effect of living in a society where personal feeling was constantly subordinated to state demands must have created a unique emotional landscape for Spartan parents, one where profound sorrow was a constant unspoken companion. The silent burden loss. Grief and societal expectation is not just about ancient mourning customs. It's a chilling exploration of the human cost of a society built on absolute military imperative and the deliberate suppression of individual emotion. It reveals a world where the very essence of human sorrow and profound loss was deliberately sacrificed for the brutal demands of a warrior state, transforming natural grief into a profound, often agonizing act of emotional suppression and a terrifying testament to the hidden miseries woven into the very fabric of Spartan society, often at the agonizing cost of unexpressed tears, shattered spirits, and the ultimate surrender of personal pain to the glory of the polis. As you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps feeling the quiet comfort of your own freedom to mourn, your supportive community, and the secure knowledge that tears are not a weakness. Remember the ancient Spartan parent, their heart heavy with unwept sorrow, their spirit hardened by societal demand, a chilling testament to the terrible. Silent price paid for Spartan might. Let's gently return from the heavy, unspoken weight of the silent burden loss, grief and societal expectation, where you, a modern person, felt the profound agony of a Spartan parent forbidden to mourn. If Chapter 8 explored the silent sorrow of losing a son in battle, tonight we'll turn to an equally profound, yet often overlooked form of sacrifice within Spartan society, the immense dangers faced by mothers in childbirth, and the almost sacred status afforded to those who perished in this act. We're going to explore the stark, often terrifying, reality of a mother's plight childbirth, risks and maternal sacrifice, contemplating how, in an era before modern medicine, the very act of bringing life into the world was a perilous journey. And for Spartan women, this risk was elevated by the state's relentless demand for strong, numerous offspring, revealing a profound paradox where ultimate communal survival was utterly dependent on the individual fortitude and life-threatening sacrifice of its birthing mothers, making every birth a gamble for survival and every maternal death a chilling testament to the state's absolute reliance on this most fundamental, yet dangerous act. Imagine yourself now, an ancient Spartan woman, not confidently preparing for a safe, medically assisted delivery in a modern hospital in, say, New Orleans, Louisiana, with skilled doctors and advanced technology, but instead feeling the intense, overwhelming pain of labor, knowing that every contraction is a gamble for your own life, and that your ultimate contribution to the state might be to perish in the act of giving it a new warrior. Picture yourself as a woman in a historical period with high maternal mortality rates, where childbirth is a leading cause of death, and every pregnancy carries an inherent, terrifying risk to your life. With limited medical intervention, or consider a woman in a resource-scarce historical community where the demand for a strong, growing population outweighs concerns for individual maternal safety. And sacrificing one's life in childbirth is seen as the ultimate patriotic act, far more immediate and less personally secure than simply following a birth plan in a modern, well-equipped hospital in Boston, Massachusetts. The innocent cries of a newborn, once a sound of pure joy, now mingle with the chilling silence of uncertainty and the unspoken burden of profound personal risk, thick with the pervasive anxiety of a life where the most fundamental act of creation is also a constant dance with death. This is the pervasive, often heartbreaking, reality of a mother's plight childbirth, risks and maternal sacrifice, where the very essence of procreation was not merely a natural process, but a high-stakes, life-threatening act of ultimate service to the warrior state, transforming the miracle of birth into a profound, often agonizing sacrifice, and revealing a chilling truth that in this society forged in iron, individual female lives were utterly secondary to the collective strength of the military, making every birth a test of physical endurance and every maternal death a silent testament to the absolute power of the state over the very bodies of its women. While the male Spartan experience was defined by the battlefield, the female Spartan experience, particularly for mothers, was defined by an equally perilous arena childbirth. In an age before modern medicine, the act of bringing new life into the world was inherently fraught with danger. For Spartan women, this danger was compounded by the state's relentless demand for strong, numerous offspring, elevating childbirth risks to a level of profound maternal sacrifice. This wasn't about navigating a complex birthing plan with a team of medical professionals in, say, a modern hospital in San Francisco, California. This was a terrifying gamble with one's life, for the good of the polis. It truly sucked to know that giving birth could easily kill you, but it was considered the ultimate service to Sparta. A common historical truth is that in ancient Greece, maternal mortality rates were significantly high. And for Spartan women, dying in childbirth was considered as honorable as a man dying in battle, granting them the unique privilege of having their name inscribed on their tombstone. A rarity for women in that era. Historians still widely debate the precise medical practices available to Spartan women during childbirth, and whether their rigorous physical training as discussed in Girls of Sparta in Chapter 6 genuinely reduced birth complications or simply prepared them psychologically for the arduous process. In ancient times, and particularly in Sparta, with its emphasis on physical perfection and strength. From birth, as we recalled from the Spartan cradle in Chapter 1, bearing children was not merely a private familial event, it was a civic duty. The survival and strength of the Spartan state depended entirely on a continuous supply of healthy male warriors. This placed immense pressure on women to conceive and deliver. The risks of childbirth were catastrophic. Without knowledge of hygiene, antibiotics, or modern surgical techniques, complications during labor and delivery were often fatal. Hemorrhage, infection, puerperal fever, obstructed labor, and eclampsia were common causes of death for mothers. For the child, issues like breech presentation, prolonged labor, or infection could also be deadly. Imagine entering labor in, say, a rural cabin in the American frontier during the 18th century, with only a midwife and basic knowledge. Knowing that your life hangs in the balance with every contraction, far more immediate and terrifying than simply dealing with discomfort during a planned modern birth in suburban Dallas, Texas, a fascinating yet rarely discussed detail about a mother's plight. Childbirth risks and maternal sacrifice is the curious phenomenon of the whispered birth omens, where, during a difficult or prolonged labor, some Spartan women or their attendants might clandestinely seek out and interpret subtle traditional omens. Perhaps the pattern of flickering lamplight, the sudden flight of a specific bird, or the inexplicable breaking of a domestic item within the birthing chamber, not as a substitute for practical assistance, but as a deeply personal, almost desperate attempt to gain psychological reassurance or prepare for the worst, transforming a private medical emergency into a poignant, almost ritualized search for meaning and a silent, unspoken plea for a favorable outcome against the backdrop of overwhelming medical uncertainty. Imagine yourself, a Spartan woman in labor, her eyes fixed on the shadows dancing on the wall, searching for a sign, any sign, of hope or despair. A deeply personal and often overlooked detail of the immense emotional and spiritual burden carried during this perilous act. It truly sucked to face such danger with so little medical help, but a belief in omens might offer a fleeting comfort. The unique societal recognition of maternal sacrifice underscored the gravity of this risk. In Spartan society, having your name inscribed on your tombstone was a rare honor, almost exclusively reserved for men who died heroically in battle. However, for women, there was only one exception: dying in childbirth. This singular allowance speaks volumes about how highly the Spartans valued the act of reproduction and the supreme sacrifice a mother made for the state. Her death in this act was considered equivalent to a warrior falling on the battlefield. Both were ultimate services to Sparta. Historians still widely debate whether this honor for women dying in childbirth genuinely reflects a societal appreciation for their sacrifice, or if it was primarily a utilitarian acknowledgement of their reproductive role, implicitly encouraging them to embrace the dangers for the state's demographic needs. This honor was, of course, cold comfort to the woman herself, or her family if she perished. It meant that a woman's greatest moment of triumph, bringing a new life into the world, could also be her last. The joy of a successful birth was always tinged with the relief of having survived. A stark contrast to the modern focus on celebrating safe delivery, the physical training that Spartan girls underwent, from a young age, was intended to make them strong and resilient. Theoretically better prepared for the rigors of childbirth as discussed in Girls of Sparta in Chapter 6. They were known for their muscular physiques and robust health. However, even the strongest body is vulnerable to the inherent dangers of complex biological processes. While their training might have given them a psychological edge in enduring pain, it could not eliminate the fundamental medical risks. The pressure to produce children, especially sons, was unrelenting. In a society that lost many men in warfare, as we remembered from Childhood's End in Chapter 5, the replacement of manpower was crucial. This meant Spartan women were expected to be fertile and to bear multiple children throughout their reproductive years, each pregnancy carrying its own renewed set of risks. Their entire reproductive lives were a series of potentially fatal gambles, all in service of the polis. Beyond the physical danger, there was also the emotional toll on the surviving family, particularly the children now motherless, and the husband left without a partner. While Spartan society famously suppressed grief, as we saw in The Silent Burden in Chapter 8, the personal loss was undoubtedly profound. Another unspoken burden borne by a society that prioritized the collective over the individual. A mother's plight. Childbirth risks and maternal sacrifice is not just about ancient birthing practices. It's a profound exploration of the ultimate, often unacknowledged, sacrifice demanded of women in a militaristic society. It reveals a world where the very essence of procreation was not merely a natural process, but a high-stakes, life-threatening act of ultimate service to the warrior state, transforming the miracle of birth into a profound, often agonizing, sacrifice, and a terrifying testament to the hidden miseries woven into the very fabric of Spartan society. Often at the agonizing cost of a mother's life and the silent grief of her family, as you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps feeling the quiet comfort of modern medical safety, your profound appreciation for safe childbirth, and the secure knowledge that a mother's life is cherished above all else. Remember the ancient Spartan woman, her body straining, her life in peril, making the ultimate sacrifice for a state that demanded everything. A chilling testament to the terrible, unique demands placed on the mothers of Sparta. Let's gently return from the ultimate, often terrifying sacrifice of a mother's plight, childbirth. Risks and maternal sacrifice, where you, a modern person, felt the profound dangers faced by Spartan women simply in the act of giving life. If Chapter 9 explored the individual and biological sacrifices demanded by that ancient society, tonight we'll bring our journey to a poignant close by bridging the centuries, contemplating how, despite the vast chasm of time and technological advancement, the core principles of Spartan child-rearing discipline, resilience, communal influence, and the subtle pressures of societal expectation still echo, sometimes uncomfortably, in the complexities of modern parenting and enduring pressures today. We're going to explore the surprising, often uncomfortable parallels between the ironclad ideals of ancient Sparta and the nuanced challenges of raising children in the 21st century, revealing that while we no longer throw infants into chasms or snatch boys at age 7, the enduring quest to mold responsible, capable individuals still grapples with balancing individual freedom against collective good, and the pervasive anxieties of parents to prepare their children for an uncertain world, making the echoes of Sparta's harsh lessons surprisingly resonant in our own lives. Imagine yourself now, a modern parent, not confidently dismissing the lessons of history as utterly irrelevant to your nurturing approach in, say, a progressive school district in Berkeley, California, where emotional intelligence and creativity are prioritized, but instead, feeling a faint, almost subconscious recognition of ancient echoes in your own dilemmas, the struggle to balance screen time with outdoor play, the pressure to enroll children in competitive sports from a young age, the anxiety of preparing them for a demanding future, and the pervasive fear of their personal failure in a highly competitive world. Picture yourself as a researcher in developmental psychology, constantly observing how modern societal pressures, from academic performance to social media influence, subtly shape children's identities and resilience, sometimes in ways that prioritize conformity over individual well-being. Or consider a community organizer advocating for children's mental health in a high-pressure urban environment, constantly confronting the challenges of competitive extracurriculars, academic stress, and the systemic pressures that sometimes inadvertently strip away childhood joy in the pursuit of success. far more immediate and less personally comfortable than simply assuming ancient history has nothing to teach us about modern child rearing in a suburban home in Austin, Texas. The innocent laughter of children, once a symbol of pure, unadulterated joy, now seems imbued with a subtle, uncomfortable resonance of historical pressures and enduring anxieties, thick with the silent echoes of those whose lives are still, in surprising ways, shaped by the pervasive quest to mold them for a demanding world. This is the pervasive, often poignant, reality of echoes of iron modern parenting and enduring pressures, where the ancient demands of a warrior society, though transformed by time and social progress, continue to manifest in new, insidious forms within our contemporary lives, transforming every parenting choice into a silent negotiation between individual freedom and societal expectation, and revealing a chilling truth that the ultimate symbols of modern opportunity and personal success are often directly tied to the unacknowledged, enduring struggle to raise children who can not only survive, but thrive in an ever-demanding world. Our journey through the brutal, unique, and often heartbreaking realities of raising children in ancient Spartan society has, hopefully, etched a vivid picture in your mind. Yet, as we step back into the 21st century, it becomes clear that many of the fundamental principles and pressures that defined Spartan child rearing, while stripped of their literal chasms and direct state abductions, have simply shape-shifted into new, often equally relentless modern parallels and enduring pressures for parents and children around the globe. The echoes of Spartan iron, it turns out, still resonate, sometimes uncomfortably, in the fabric of our contemporary lives. It truly sucked to raise a child in Sparta, but even today, parenting is far from easy, and the pressures are immense. A common historical truth is that while modern societies largely reject the extreme and brutal methods of ancient Spartan child rearing, contemporary parenting still grapples with the tension between fostering individual autonomy and instilling discipline, resilience, and preparedness for societal demands, often leading to debates about the role of structured activities, academic rigor, and the influence of peer groups versus family values. Historians and social scientists still widely debate the long-term impacts of various modern parenting philosophies, and whether current societal pressures, like the intense competition for college admissions or professional success, inadvertently create new forms of agoge-like pressures on children. The emphasis on resilience and discipline, a core tenet from Harsh Lessons in Chapter 3, finds surprising modern parallels. While we don't deliberately starve our children, there's a pervasive societal push for grit and anti-fragility. Parents enroll children in competitive sports leagues from a very young age, pushing them to excel, to suck it up, to endure setbacks. The idea is to build character, to prepare them for a competitive world. Imagine coaching your 5-year-old soccer team in, say, suburban Houston, Texas, and consciously pushing them to be resilient after a loss. A subtle echo of the Spartan drive for toughness. The state control and communal influence, a defining feature from Agoge's grip in Chapter 2, also have intriguing modern reflections. While children aren't taken by the state, schools, extracurricular activities, and peer groups exert immense influence. The village that raises a child today is often less about familial bonds and more about institutional structures. Daycares, schools, sports teams, and digital communities. These environments, while generally benign, still shape children's values, behaviors, and identities, sometimes in ways that diverge from parental desires. Think about the pressure for your child to join certain clubs or wear specific brands to fit in at school in, say, a modern high school in Los Angeles, California, reflecting a subtle yet powerful form of communal shaping. A fascinating yet rarely discussed detail about echoes of iron modern parenting and enduring pressures is the curious phenomenon of the digital agoge scroll, where, despite the vast technological differences, some modern parents, feeling overwhelmed by the sheer volume of conflicting parenting advice from social media groups to expert blogs and the intense pressure to ensure their child's optimal development will sometimes meticulously follow rigid, almost ritualistic schedules for their children's activities, from highly structured playdates to intensive academic tutoring and multiple competitive sports. Not as an act of personal preference, but as a deeply personal, clandestine attempt to quell their anxieties and ensure their child's perceived readiness for a demanding future. Transforming modern parenting choices into a poignant, almost desperate quest for control and a silent, unspoken surrender to societal pressures that echo the ancient Spartan quest for the perfect child. Imagine yourself a modern parent, meticulously scheduling your child's week, scrolling through parenting forums for the right approach, a deeply personal and often overlooked detail of the enduring human desire to perfectly prepare our children for an uncertain world. It truly sucked to feel such pressure to raise the perfect child. But sometimes a rigid schedule offered a fleeting sense of control, the fear of failure. A profound shadow from childhood's end in Chapter 5 is still palpable for modern parents. It's not the fear of public humiliation in the agora if your child isn't a warrior, but the fear of them falling behind academically, socially, or professionally. Parents agonize over test scores, college admissions, and career prospects. The pressure to ensure children succeed in a highly competitive global economy can be overwhelming, leading to intense parental oversight and anxiety that, in some ways, mirrors the Spartan obsession with creating flawless instruments for the state. Think about the pervasive anxiety parents feel about their child getting into a good college in, say, suburban Virginia, a modern battle for perceived elite status. Historians and sociologists still widely debate the extent to which modern parents' anxieties about their children's future success are directly influenced by broader economic shifts and societal pressures, and whether the increasing emphasis on early childhood academic achievement and extracurricular specialization truly benefits children's long-term well-being, or inadvertently creates new forms of stress. Even the reproductive pressure, a defining element from A Mother's Plight in Chapter 9, has its modern echoes. While it's no longer about simply producing strong warriors, societal expectations about parenthood, family size, and the perceived ideal family unit can still exert subtle pressure. The decision to have children, and how many, is often influenced by economic realities, social norms, and the implicit idea that perpetuating one's lineage is a fundamental part of life. The parental absence and limited contact, a core reality from Chapter 7, also resonate, albeit in different forms. In our hyper-connected, yet often fragmented, modern world, busy work schedules, extensive screen time, and children's packed extracurricular schedules can inadvertently create emotional distance between family members. While not enforced by the state, the demands of modern life can still lead to parents and children spending less quality time together, relying on technology for communication rather than genuine intimacy. Imagine trying to connect with your teenager who spends hours in their room on social media, a subtle, modern form of limited contact, despite physical proximity. Finally, the silent burden of loss and grief, a poignant reality from Chapter 8, still weighs heavily. While we have more openly accepted forms of mourning, the pressure to be strong, to move on, and to find meaning in tragedy can still be overwhelming. The expectation for resilience, even in the face of profound personal loss, remains a powerful undercurrent in society, often leading to private struggles with grief. Echoes of iron modern parenting and enduring pressures is not just an ending to our historical journey, it's a profound reflection on the enduring human quest to raise capable, resilient individuals. It reveals that while the physical settings and brutal methods of ancient Sparta are long gone, the fundamental pressures to mold children for a demanding world, to balance individual potential with societal needs, and to navigate the pervasive anxieties of an uncertain future, remain strikingly familiar. The threads of ancient Spartan iron, it turns out, are still woven into the often complex, always challenging fabric of modern parenting.